All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So again, I'm Dr. Jeff Stanley, and I'm a doctor with Virta Health. I'm joined by Dr. Brittany Volk, one of our health coaches, dietitians, and researchers. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about how to ditch the dangerous diabetes meds and how Virta can specifically help with that. So to give just a little bit of brief background about myself before I turn it over to Dr. Volk, I did my MD at the University of Southern California. I'm board certified in internal medicine and also in obesity medicine. I've been with Virta for about 3 years now as a physician treating patients throughout the country via telemedicine. Prior to that, I was actually a primary care physician for a number of years. And just to give you kind of a bit of my own story as to how I got interested in nutrition and health, like a lot of people, I sort of struggled with my weight growing up and gained a bunch of weight in college. And I found out that for myself personally, the only thing that really seemed to work to get the weight off and keep it off was cutting my carbohydrates. So that kind of sent me down the path of learning about the kind of how powerful of an intervention low carbohydrate diets and specifically ketogenic diets are for improving things like obesity and diabetes. And I feel just incredibly fortunate to be able to work with patients on a daily basis, to be able to help people, get off of their diabetes meds, normalize their blood sugar, lose a significant amount of weight, and really kind of take personal control over their health. So I'll be joining back in a little bit in the presentation to give some of the background about kind of diabetes medications and some of the potential harms. But I'll kick it over to Dr. Volk to introduce herself and kind of go into the beginning of the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Stanley. Well, welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I would invite you anytime throughout this presentation to enter questions into the chat box. We'll be answering them at the end of the presentation, so please feel free to write them at any time. You'll also be receiving a follow-up email of how to view this webinar again. So if for some reason you have to drop off or you want to watch again, you'll receive an email following the webinar. So I'm Dr. Brittany Volk. I am a registered dietitian, a scientist, and a health coach here at Virta Health. I had been researching nutrition, specifically low carbohydrate nutrition and its impact on not only health, but on people's quality of life. And so I've been doing that for about a decade. And when the opportunity to come work for Virta, a company actually reversing diabetes, when that opportunity came about, it was sort of perfect for me because I love to be able to translate the science. So it's one thing to be able to conduct the research and watch the impact that it can have, but it's another to be able to then say, okay, here you go, here's how you put this into practice in your everyday life. And so that's what I do. And then on a personal note, as probably many of you out there also are in the same shoes as I am, I have so many people in my family who I've seen battle with the complications of diabetes, and not just high blood sugars, but the complications that come along with it. And being such a strong genetic component to type 2 diabetes, I kind of knew, okay, it's definitely in my future. I at least have the potential to develop type 2 diabetes. And so I, definitely have this really strong feeling towards helping people and getting the word out. And so that's just a little bit about me, but I'll jump into specifically Virta. We'll talk today about, what Virta is. We'll explain it so you have a full understanding of our treatment, the dangers of type 2 diabetes and how Virta reverses diabetes. And then I want to make sure that everybody understands the patient experience and how to get started if you're interested in letting us help you ditch those diabetes medications. Our mission here at Virta is pretty bold. It's to reverse type 2 diabetes in 100 million people by the year 2025. And I'm incredibly proud to say that we have the first and only clinically proven treatment to reverse type 2 diabetes without medications or surgery. And we do it safely and it's sustainable. We also have the research to back it up. So we have a very large, the largest and longest ongoing clinical trial in this space. And our research shows some really great results. Dr. Stanley will speak more to this later, but to give you an overview, 60% of patients who completed a year of the Virta treatment reversed their type 2 diabetes. And what that means is they're reducing their A1C below the diabetic threshold and getting rid or eliminate or getting rid of or reducing medications, including insulin. That's a really big deal. 94% of insulin users reduced or eliminated their dosage at 1 year. So the results are impactful. But I'm going to let one of our patients here tell you her story because yes, 60% of patients reversed their type 2 diabetes at 1 year, and that's important, but that's a statistic. It comes down to real people like Wilma here. So I'm going to let her tell you her story.
They immediately put me on insulin. The thought of me sticking myself with a needle was beyond my belief. Having to take medication in general is just a bore. It's something you have to keep at your hip all the time. You can't leave home without it. My relationship with food before Virta, I love food. Specific foods in particular that, keep your numbers high and, keep the diabetes thriving in your body, I thought I would never be able to get rid of type 2 diabetes. I thought I was going to be a slave to insulin for the rest of my life. I started the Virta program in June, and I've been on the Virta program for 5 months, and I've lost 41 pounds. And after 3 weeks on the program, I was completely off insulin. I don't wake up tired, sluggish. I look forward to my day. I have way more energy and I do more things. I get things done now. I have 5 grandchildren, but I can keep up with them. I can take them to the park. So my energy level is just like through the roof. I've learned a new way of thinking and a new way of living. I look at food completely different, and I never want to go back to that box of pills that I had before. I feel like a new person. I'm really happy with how I look, how I feel. I like the way, I love the way my life is now.
How Virta makes it possible for people like Wilma and so many others is through really 2 main things that we're going to go through here today. Our proprietary clinical protocol, which includes both medical and nutrition guidance, and our continuous remote care. So we have technology that allows us to deliver the Virta treatment to anyone across the country. And now, the diabetes epidemic, it's a really big problem. Over 52% of the people in this country, adults, have type 2 diabetes or prediabetes. And so our diabetic population is not only getting sicker with more medications, but our population of people in the prediabetes category, every year, 10% of those individuals move into the category of type 2 diabetes. So this problem is getting bigger and bigger every year. And if we take a step back and look at one of the places where this problem began, we can really look to the dietary guidelines. Our nutrition guidelines in this country have told us for decades now to consume the majority of our food coming from carbohydrates, so bread, cereal, rice, pasta. But the problem here is that for the first time, Americans were told what to consume and the rise of diabetes began. So if you look here in 1977, our dietary guidelines were published and our rates of diabetes skyrocketed, and the biggest problem of all is that these guidelines were based on flawed science. They're obviously not working. The other thing that's so frustrating is that we've actually done a really good job as Americans of following these guidelines by increasing our carbohydrate intake, reducing our fat intake, and yet the problem persists. Now, diabetes is fundamentally a disease of high blood sugar. When our blood sugar gets out of control, it's diagnosed by hemoglobin A1C. That's one of the ways in which we can tell that someone has type 2 diabetes. An A1C of 6.5 or higher means that you have type 2 diabetes. And now if we think about nutrition, I like to always kind of start with the basics, because if we're going to understand our blood sugar, it's important to know how foods impact our blood sugar. So let's start with the basics here. When we think about the different food categories or macronutrients, we have carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. In the carbohydrate category, we have things like I mentioned, the breads, the rice, the pastas, potatoes, even fruits, and then those starchier vegetables. Fats like butter and olive oil and coconut oil, and protein sources like eggs, meats, fish, nuts, poultry. Now, these each impact us differently. Calories in foods are not created equal. And when we think about how they impact us, we're going to talk about our blood sugar, because if diabetes is a problem of blood sugar control, we should know how the foods we're eating then impact our blood sugar. So if we look at something like a carbohydrate, think of a slice of bread. When we consume a slice of bread, it gets broken down into sugar and raises our blood sugar, and sometimes quite quickly, and then follows with a rapid drop in blood sugar. Protein, when we consume, let's say, an egg or a slice of cheese, it'll have a little impact on our blood sugar, but not nearly to the extent that eating that slice of bread will have. But when we consume fat, we don't get a rise in our blood sugar. And so we really need to remember that this basic figure when thinking about making science-based nutrition recommendations. What is going to impact our blood sugar? And when we think of normal blood sugar, it's something like under fasting conditions, when you go to your doctor, a normal blood sugar is going to be under 100. Okay, but that's actually only a teaspoon of sugar in your bloodstream, 5 grams. It is not that much at all. And when we put this in terms of food, let's take something like what happens when we eat a cup of brown rice. Now, brown rice fits very nicely into the bottom of that food pyramid, right? So, whole grains, low in fat and calories. A cup of brown rice contains 45 grams of carbohydrates, which means 9 teaspoons of sugar. 9 teaspoons in a system that's only supposed to contain 1 teaspoon. What happens? Well, what happens to that incoming 9 teaspoons of sugar is that the body has to get your blood sugar back down to a teaspoon. We can't walk around with high blood sugar all day long. It's not good for us. And the body really wants to tightly control that sugar at just a teaspoon. So what happens is very dramatically different based on one's metabolism. Now, let's take the person on the left who has a high tolerance to carbohydrates. That person can eat that cup of brown rice, can get that blood sugar back down to normal conditions, no problem. And it all comes down to a hormone called insulin. When we eat something that makes our blood sugar go up, like that slice of bread, a hormone called insulin is released to push that blood sugar out of circulation into cells where it can then be used for energy. That's under normal conditions. This system happens perfectly. In someone who has a low tolerance to carbohydrates, the person on the right here who eats that same cup of brown rice can have a very different response, because it can be tougher for the body to release the amount of insulin that will keep that blood sugar normal. Our body becomes resistant to that insulin, meaning it doesn't recognize insulin in the same way that someone with a high carbohydrate tolerance have. And what happens is blood sugars rise. The other thing is that insulin is our fat storage hormone. So every time this happens, our body is signaled to store fat. And we're doing this all day long. We're not just eating 1 cup of rice at one meal, right? We're eating all throughout the day. So we're seeing this rise in blood sugar, rise in insulin, rise in that signal of our body to store fat. It's happening all day long, day after day. And over time, in those who are carbohydrate intolerant or have a low tolerance to carbohydrates, this gets worse. And when our body can no longer maintain normal blood sugar levels, we develop type 2 diabetes. And it's more than just a problem with high blood sugar. High blood sugars, persistently high blood sugars, lead to big problems. Blood vessel damage, nerve damage, kidney disease, or renal failure. And if you've ever witnessed somebody go through some of these conditions, it can be devastating. I mean, these are really big problems, far beyond just elevations in blood sugar. And how we handle this today, I'm going to let Dr. Stanley take over since he firsthand has witnessed this in our medical system. So Dr. Stanley, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Volk. So yeah, as she was saying, you know, we have kind of the standard approach that's been used to treat diabetes and to try to avoid some of the complications of high blood sugar. And what's seen in that kind of standard of care is, in general, people have an increase in insulin. So either through insulin injections or medications that tell the pancreas to make more insulin. There's a whole host of other medications that reduce blood sugar in other ways, but we'll talk a bit about how they have side effects as well. And then, you know, generally people are told by their physician to work on decreasing body weight when they're diagnosed with diabetes. And, you know, one of the issues here is that, you know, the approach that people are given, they're told to eat less and exercise more. And if that doesn't work, then, you know, can maybe consider something like bariatric surgery. And, you know, what I found in my own experience kind of growing up overweight, and I think what the vast majority of pretty much anyone else who's dealt with weight issues or diabetes is really the fact that, you know, we see that eat less and exercise more just does not work as a strategy. Now, sure, you can lose some weight temporarily, but what generally happens is when you try to lose weight through starvation or through overexercise, the body has all of these kind of countermeasures that it does to try to fight back. And it makes it very difficult to use that as a strategy to lose weight and keep it off. And this was actually really shown pretty well through what was called the Biggest Loser study. So a lot of you probably remember the television show, The Biggest Loser, where, you know, basically they kind of took people struggling with obesity and basically put them through extremely restrictive diets, you know, exercising to the point of collapsing. And sure, people were able to lose a lot of weight, but there was actually a follow-up study where they looked at all the people who'd been in the study and actually looked at their metabolic rate, so the rate at which their body kind of burned calories. And they found that by exercising too much and, you know, starving themselves, that they actually damaged their metabolism. And so this example here, this gentleman, Sean, so he started out the show at 444 pounds, you know, got down very drastically down to 289 pounds. But after the show ended, he got back up to 450. And when they looked at his metabolic rate, it actually slowed down significantly. So he now burns 458 fewer calories a day than would be expected for a man his size. So that's, you know, the equivalent of a hamburger a day that his body is basically just not burning. So, you know, when that initial approach of eat less and exercise more doesn't work, despite people's best effort, the next step in most cases is to go on to medications. And again, we can have medications that indirectly reduce blood sugar. So there are some that cause people to, you know, urinate out glucose, others that stop the liver from making as much glucose. Or we go directly towards medications such as injected insulin to directly increase insulin. But one of the issues with that is that actually the side effects of these medications can actually be, you know, quite scary. So there's some minor ones like upset stomach or bloating, but actually life-threatening ones like low blood sugar. So if you take too high of a dose of insulin, or you skip a meal and don't eat, or just have some other reason why things are kind of out of whack, people can have a dangerously low blood sugar and actually have a risk of, you know, going into a coma. You know, some of the other things we see are that the insulin itself, we know that it actually is a weight storage hormone. So it tells our body to store fat. And so when people are put on insulin, they tend to gain weight despite their best efforts. And this was really shown well in a study that was called the ACCORD trial, which stands for the Action to Control Cardiovascular Risk in Diabetes. It was a big study of more than 8,000 people randomized into two groups. One group that had intensive blood pressure or blood glucose treatment via insulin and other medications. And then we had a standard arm that got other medications. And what was seen is that, first of all, in the intensive arm, not surprisingly, because they were injecting the fat storage hormone insulin, they had significantly more weight gain. So on average, they gained about 5 kilograms or more than 10 pounds per person of extra weight just due to being placed on a higher dose of insulin. But the really kind of scary and surprising thing that happened was that the trial was actually stopped early because they saw that this intensive therapy arm, despite having better blood glucose control, actually had a higher rate of death. It's not quite understood why that is. It could be from dangerous low blood sugars, could be from the insulin itself. But we do know that this really kind of made a lot of us pause and think, are the medications that are traditionally used for diabetes actually causing our patients harm? And that's why, as part of my job, I work to safely and effectively reduce people's medications, particularly insulin, again, to work on making people as healthy and as free of medications as possible. So you have the goal to reduce blood sugar. That's something that we're all going for. And we can use the standard of care model kind of on the left, as we discussed, or you can use an approach that really is, I think, a lot more commonsensical. And it really works to directly reduce blood sugar by significantly reducing carbohydrate intake. So if you're not eating carbohydrates, you're not going to have those big spikes in glucose. And you can let your body rely on energy from burning fat. And that's the approach that our team at Virta uses with great effect. So again, it's pretty simple. We reduce carbohydrate below personal tolerance levels. So, everyone's a bit different in how much carbohydrate they can tolerate. But because we are checking things like blood glucose, ketones, weight, general energy, and other things, we're able to figure out what your personal carbohydrate tolerance is and then really dial that in. So the other thing I think is really important to stress is that, you may have been hearing more in the news about a ketogenic diet or low carb diets. And, people sometimes throw around the term a fad diet or things like that. But it's really important to know. And for someone like myself, who's been following this science for decades, we know that there is ongoing research and completed research that show that this is safe and effective. So more than 20 randomized controlled trials, which are really the gold standard for how we assess things like medications or diet. 5 meta-analyses, which are basically big combinations of multiple studies together, and then 10 other published trials. And what's interesting is this actually dwarfs a lot of the other research in other diets that are often recommended for diabetes. So even things like the DASH diet you may have heard of, or vegetarian diets, actually have less published data than a low carbohydrate approach. And it's also really important to note here that this approach of low carbohydrate and ketogenic nutrition is fully supported by the American Diabetes Association as a first-line approach to treating type 2 diabetes. So this is something that you can, a lot of doctors maybe aren't aware of this, but we're happy to provide the literature to support it, to know that this is the current standard of care. And this is an option that patients deserve to be able to try. And this approach achieves glycemic control, so control of blood glucose, without the need for medications. And what this graphic shows is that, you've got a whole host of different people here, and they all have a different carbohydrate tolerance. And we talked about that before, right? And so it's not always fair. This person here, she can only maybe tolerate 20 grams of carbohydrates a day without having negative effects like high blood glucose, high blood pressure, maybe other issues. Whereas this lucky guy can have 250 grams of carbohydrates a day and do fine. But the key is you don't know that without testing and tracking biomarkers and just watching really closely. And that's what we do. So we don't just give you a pamphlet and a, pat on the back and say, good luck. We're with you every step of the way to try to implement this as a lifestyle. So just for basics in our nutritional guidance, again, this really starts with carbohydrate restriction. So it's a low carbohydrate, high healthy fat diet, which puts people into what's called nutritional ketosis. Highly personalized. So that means that, based on, what kind of foods you can afford, cultural, religious beliefs, people who are vegetarian or vegan for different reasons, we can work with that. And we have people that are successful really across the spectrum. And that's what your coach works with you to do, to dial in. And then just, the overall basics again is that you can achieve some really amazing results like Wilma did with getting off of medications by eating delicious real food until satisfied. So this isn't a 500 calorie a day, meal replacement type of approach. You're eating real foods. You're, either that can be cooking at home, eating out, really whatever works with your lifestyle. And you may have heard, the idea of using food as medicine. And I think another way to look at it is, we can really use food instead of medicine. So what if you could reduce your blood glucose, get off of medications, improve your blood pressure by just changing what you eat and by eating things that are pictured on this page, which are delicious. And, I think I mentioned before that I followed a low carbohydrate diet, but I've eaten a low carbohydrate diet for about 15 years now and a ketogenic diet for about 4 years now. And I find it satisfying. I enjoy it. Again, I recommend it to my patients and my family. And it's something that people truly can stick with. Another thing that I think is really helpful about what we're able to do is that, because of the intensive support that we're able to give, we're able to help you sort of between doctor visits. So, you might see your doctor 2 times a year, maybe 3-4 times a year based on, what other issues you have going on or whether you have an acute thing like a cold or something that you need to get a checkup on. But, what we see is that when you are changing how you eat, losing weight, lowering your blood glucose, some of the changes need to happen on a 24/7 basis. So, if you're just starting and your glucose improves dramatically, you need someone like myself or someone else on our physician team to reduce your insulin so that you don't have a dangerous low. And primary care docs, I have a ton of respect for them. I was previously a primary care doc. I think it's probably the most difficult job in medicine, but they just don't have the time or the technological backup to be able to see your glucose and ketones on a minute by minute basis, and to be able to provide the support you need to choose what to eat, and then also the support that you need to adjust meds as needed. And I think Britt touched on this a little bit, but, we really use these 2 main sources of innovation. So one of them, on the left here is the proprietary Virta clinical protocol. And what that means is that you've got a physician or provider who's watching at all times to, make medical adjustments in terms of your medications. And again, to personalize the carbohydrate restriction to your own body's response. And then we have the technology which enables this continuous remote care. So, this is something that would not have been possible maybe even 3-4 years ago, but the ability that you can get all of your care through your smartphone. And so these are just some of the providers on our physician team. Including Dr. Michael Scahill, Dr. Caroline Roberts, who's an endocrinologist who specializes in the treatment of patients with insulin pumps and very complex regimen. There's me back when I was clean shaven. And then Dr. Sarah Hallberg, who, if you're not familiar with her work, I would highly recommend anyone just Google her name and go watch her YouTube video. It actually has millions of views, and it really forms some of the basis of what we do at Virta, which is the idea that by changing what you eat and by not following those old, outdated, high-carb guidelines, people can get off of medications and take control of their life. So it was after I saw her YouTube video that led me down the path to joining Virta, and I know that she's inspired millions of patients to make this change and to really improve their life. And then here's some of our coach team. And the coach is really, the person that you are going to form a close relationship with. So, this is not just telling you what to eat. This is the person who is going to be, your cheerleader. They're going to be, they can be your shoulder to cry on. They can really be this form of support that's ongoing to help you achieve your goals. And that could be everything from what you eat, and again, to long-term, to things like improving how you sleep, training for a marathon, which some of our patients have done, or just all kinds of ways to improve your life as a whole. And the support that you get, so it's not just from the coach or the physician, it's really a team effort of multiple things that come together. So you've got, here Wilma pictured again in the center. So she's tracking her biomarkers and entering those into the app. Those are seen by her coach and her physician, who are able to make real-time adjustments in her diet and her meds. There's an online community where you can do things like exchange recipes or support each other. And then there's also a ton of resources. So just things like, again, whether that's recipes, whether that's blog posts. If you're one of those people who wants to learn the science, this is the area for you. I mean, you can learn so much about not just, some people are fine with just knowing, does this work? But others want to know how and why, and you can definitely learn that. I also wanted to just briefly touch on some data, because a lot of times, you may be thinking this to yourself that, wow, this sounds great, but it sounds kind of too good to be true, that I can eat, bacon and eggs and get off my meds. So that's really why, when we founded Virta years ago, one of the very first things we did was to start a clinical trial. So this is done in conjunction with Dr. Sarah Hallberg in Lafayette, Indiana. And the goal of the trial here is really, again, to prove these outcomes. And so you can't just make wild claims or pick a random person out of a hat and show them as the best results you've ever seen. What happens here is that these are peer-reviewed results. So these are reviewed by other doctors and scientists, published in a formal journal, and critiqued to make sure that this is the real deal. And the data so far is really, it's pretty compelling. So first of all, at 1 year, and it's important to note that the study is going to go to 5 years, and we're just about to publish our 2-year data here in the next several months. But the 1-year data is out there, and we know that about 60% of patients who completed the program were able to reverse their diabetes. So basically, they got their A1C under 6.5 without needing to be on diabetes-specific meds. We have some people continue on metformin because that's a helpful medication in a whole host of things, but we'll personalize that and work with you. Some people say, I don't want to be on any meds, and we can make that happen. The average glucose improvement, so it's a 1.3 drop in hemoglobin A1C. And remember, that's in the setting of getting people off of meds. So I have one gentleman who, he's off more than 100 units of insulin and had about a 1.4% drop. We saw that 94% of people on insulin either reduced or got off it completely. The average weight loss was about 12% of body weight, or about 30 pounds per patient. And we also saw that actually people's risk of heart attack, based on a calculator that's widely used, actually improved by about 12%. We also know that medications are reduced rapidly. And so this chart here shows kind of the annual cost per patient in terms of meds. So even at about 90 days, we see that we go from more than $4,000 per patient to less than $2,000. And, that's not, many of you are not obviously paying that amount per month. However, or per year. But what we see is that you're paying an increasing amount in terms of co-pays, in terms of your healthcare premiums, like all the things that go into healthcare. And by reducing these costs, it helps you, and it also helps your employer to reduce the overall costs of care. The trial also showed benefits beyond type 2 diabetes. So people's blood pressure improved. Again, that improvement in heart disease risk factors, lower inflammation. And inflammation is a big driver. We think of a lot of diseases, whether that's heart disease or cancer or arthritis. And this was actually really quickly seen in a lot of people with bad arthritis. So we noticed that people who, previously even needed a cane to walk were able to get rid of their cane, or to start exercising again because their knees didn't hurt so much. And we actually also saw improved liver function. So fatty liver disease is a huge epidemic right now. And we saw that all the markers of fatty liver disease improved with our program. We saw that triglycerides improved. So those are sort of the fat that are in the blood and part of your cholesterol panel. And many folks who have diabetes or prediabetes have high triglycerides. So in just 10 weeks, we saw about a 22% reduction in triglycerides. I mentioned the weight loss, but here's just a little chart to show this. And what's cool here is it happens fast, right? So at 10 weeks, people lost about 7% of their body weight. So for someone who's 300 pounds, that would be 21 pounds in just 10 weeks. But then what we see here is at 1 year, that was 12% of body weight. And the most, I think, important and striking thing about this graph is that almost any other study that you see, like The Biggest Loser we talked about, or other diet studies, is you see a big U-shaped curve. And what that looks like is that, people lose weight quickly and then they gain it back just as fast. And what's cool here, and we're seeing this continue out to 2 years, is that this line is staying low. So there's, maybe a tiny little bit, a couple pounds of weight gain here from the absolute lowest, but people are not adding back this weight quickly. And then the other question that a lot of people have is, well, can it be sustained? And the answer that we've seen is absolutely yes. So 83% of patients in the clinical trial remained active at 1 year following the program. And we're actually seeing that this is even better in employers that we're working with. So people are, basically, even though they're not paying for it directly and it's paid for by their employer, we see a huge percentage of people who are sticking with the program and being successful. Just to revisit a couple of the quotes from Wilma. So she says after 3 weeks, she was completely off insulin. And she had thought that she was going to basically be a slave to insulin for the rest of her life. I'm actually Wilma's doc, and she's still doing fantastic with Virta. But I do remember that day when I told her that she could stop insulin. And she remembers that as one of the best days of her life. And then, she also mentioned that I never want to go back to that box of pills that I had before. Look at it now and just feel like crying. There were so many bottles in there. And this is something we mentioned with these other benefits, but Wilma had all kinds of other issues with breathing, lungs, asthma, and actually saw a huge improvement across the board in different health issues. So, although diabetes is our main focus, we see all sorts of collateral improvement that people note and I think really appreciate. So you have some options, right? We're not saying that this is for absolutely everyone, but we think it's incredibly important that patients are given the option as to what to choose. And we're really excited that your employer has, been able to offer this to those that are interested. And so, the approach on the left is that standard approach to diabetes management. And to me, diabetes management is such a horrible and kind of boring term, in that this means it's a lifelong increase in medications and complications, in complexity of care. And people see that over time their meds increase, their weight increases, their expenses increase, their eating options are limited, and that exercise, sort of told it's required. Whereas, we have clinically proven, in a clinical trial, that we've been able to reduce meds, help people lose weight, have them pay less money out of pocket for their medications, have an eating program that allows people to not count calories but still lose weight, and then add in exercise optionally. We're definitely there to support you. And we notice that a lot of folks, as they gain more energy and feel better, then they absolutely want to exercise. But I would say that, telling someone right off the bat to start a new diet, go to the gym every day, start running, all that, it's just not I don't think, reasonable or sustainable approach. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Volk, who's going to tell you a bit more about the Virta patient experience.
All right, well, thank you. So Dr. Stanley and I would both attest to the fact that no two patient experiences are alike, but I will give you a look into what it would be like to be a patient with Virta. Now, it's highly, highly tailored to you. Everybody's medical history is different, your conditions you're dealing with now, your biochemistry, how the program works for you, at what pace. And we take into account lifestyle preferences, dietary choices. We really, with a health coaches and the clinicians really work with you to find out what's best for you as a patient with Virta. And the enrollment process is fairly simple. Now, to find out if you're eligible, we will follow up with you via email, so you can wait on that specific link for your employer to go through this process. There's a 3-part process to this: an application, a screening, and an onboarding. The onboarding is my personal favorite as a health coach, but I do want to caution you before I tell you the details of those. The caution is that we ask you, today's presentation may sound exciting, and we believe that it is, but we want to make sure that people aren't going out there and then trying to make dietary changes on their own after watching this. Because what happens is, especially for those on medications to treat type 2 diabetes, what can happen is that you're taking the medication to lower your blood sugar, as well as making dietary changes to lower your blood sugar. And we call this the double whammy, where you can get to a level where your blood sugars are dangerously low. And we really want to avoid that from happening. So please wait until you're screened on the app and given the go-ahead by your health coach and your provider. Just my word of caution. But if you are interested in getting started, I want to tell you that the individualized care begins from day one. When you go to fill out the initial screening form, some basic information, you will then schedule a call with an intake specialist that's going to take time talking to just you. That person's going to spend time making sure you understand the treatment, you understand the commitments, that it's a right fit for you. It's your chance to ask questions and really feel like you're jumping into this treatment and confidently jumping in. Then is a visit with someone like Dr. Stanley or one of our other providers. And instead of going to Dr. Stanley's office, you get to do this via telemedicine. So in the comfort of your own home or at your office, you have a video visit with your provider to do a doctor's visit. And then when you're approved for the program, you will receive in the mail your starter kit. In that kit contains all of the materials you need to be successful. It will contain what you need to monitor your progress, such as a body weight scale. You'll step on that scale daily. It'll contain a food scale, all of your testing supplies for the course of your treatment, along with some other materials. So that starter kit, the day it arrives, is, from what I've been told by patients, it's a pretty exciting day to open that box. What my favorite part is then the onboarding onto the app. So you'll get onto the app once you receive your starter kit. You'll meet your health coach and you'll become familiar with the app and how to use it to then really start this whole journey towards diabetes reversal. The app is going to tell you what you need to do, when you need to do it, so you don't need to remember that. It's really going to guide you throughout your journey and provide educational resources like videos, written blogs, live webinars. It's really going to contain the tools you need to be successful. Now, what you see here is the notification that you need to enter what's called ketones. And you do this with a simple finger stick test with the same meter that you use to test your blood sugar, and we'll provide this in the app. But you enter this value into the app and your coach and your provider are going to get this instantly. So we can then provide feedback, like if we see a blood sugar that's a little bit higher than your usual, we can reach out and say, hey, what's going on? Maybe you're sick. Maybe there's a food that didn't really work well with you and it raised your blood sugar. Or maybe it's lower blood sugar and Dr. Stanley's going to say, okay, it's really time for a medication change. And this is what it's all about, right? Reducing and eliminating medications. And now through the app, you're going to be able to text your coach pretty much like you would text a friend. So connecting on your phone, on the app, this can be done on a smartphone, a computer, a tablet. You have constant contact with your coach, and your coach is really your front line of defense, who's going to then relay messages to your provider as well. So you really get some instant feedback from your care team as needed. And as your coach, we are going to guide you through all of these nutrition changes that you'll be making. And as we're doing that, I want to remind you, there is no calorie counting. We really help you understand what it's like to eat until you're satisfied. Eating real foods, delicious foods that work with your preferences and your lifestyle, whether you're on the go and dining out all the time, or you love to cook and find new recipes in our resource center on the app, you can find what's right for you. And while exercise is great for so many things, we're never going to push you to exercise. In order to reverse your type 2 diabetes, you do not need to exercise. People usually love when I tell them that. And we focus on more than just type 2 diabetes. So I get the question of what happens after I reverse my diabetes? Well, guess what? We are working on the entire person. So we'll work on sleep and stress. And if you want to exercise, we'll help you. We'll be there to provide guidance, be all kinds of behavioral health, dealing with social settings. We understand that this is an important lifestyle change. And so we're going to be there to work with you throughout the entire treatment. We really do want to help you, like our other patients, get healthier by reducing medications, eliminating them when we can, get healthier and just feel better. And so we really hope today that we've encouraged you to look into the Virta treatment. Like I said, you will receive an email in your inbox shortly after this presentation. Please click on the link. There's no obligation to go through with the treatment once you do apply, so there's no obligation to just submitting some basic information and setting up that intake call with a specialist who can really answer all of your questions. We absolutely welcome all of your questions now or later. If you have a question later, you can email support@virtahealth.com. Please remember that if you have a question, you are welcome to submit it through the chat box, and Dr. Stanley and I will be here to answer them. We'll wait a few minutes until we get some questions, but thank you so much for sitting here and joining us on this webinar today. You know, Dr. Stanley, one of the questions that we'll often get is just how you actually work with existing providers or a patient's PCP. I think that you can speak nicely to that to ease the minds of our patients, because here's the thing, we want to make sure you're not receiving this fragmented care and we tell you one thing and then your provider, your PCP who you've been working with for years tells you something else, and we want to really align so that you get the best care and you don't feel torn between providers. So Dr. Stanley?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think the important thing to note is that we definitely do not replace primary care providers. So we want you to keep that ongoing relationship that you have with your provider. And we function pretty much like a specialty medical clinic. So similarly, if you were to go see an orthopedist or a cardiologist or an endocrinologist and get a portion of your care through them, and then they report back to your primary care provider. And we do that basically through regular updates. We let your doc know when you've signed up. We give regular updates in terms of any medication reductions that we've done. And again, we really focus on diabetes treatment. So we're making changes that are just really to keep you safe, to avoid low blood sugar or low blood pressure. And then on an ongoing basis, the idea is that we really want to make your doc's job easier by making you healthier, and keep your visits to social visits every once in a while to check in and see how well you're doing.
Excellent. And I do want to remind everybody that this webinar will be available for later viewing. It will come through your email along with that link that you can click on to then find out if you're eligible, begin the application process, and really get on your way to enrolling in the treatment. All right. Well, thank you so much, all of you, for joining us here today. We really do look forward to kind of seeing you on the other side on the app with Virta Health.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.